Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this event co-organized by the Institute for Science, Society, and Policy and ISSP-RCIScience, Cybersecurity at the Crossroads of Science, Society, and Policy. L'événement aura lieu en anglais, mais si jamais vous avez des questions à poser, n'hésitez surtout pas à les poser dans la langue de votre choix. My name is Monica Gattinger. I am the director of the Institute for Science, Society, and Policy and a professor at the University of Ottawa. It is a true pleasure to be here with you this evening, and I'm looking forward to our panel with great interest. The ISSP and RCIScience would like to begin today's event with a land acknowledgement and Indigenous affirmation. Given that both organizations are joining from different parts of the country, we will be hearing two land acknowledgements. So for RCIScience is joining from the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Today, this land is still the home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples from across Turtle Island. And RCIScience is grateful to have the opportunity to work on this land. As settlers on Turtle Island, RCIScience acknowledges that this is just a first step in reconciliation efforts and welcomes you to research the history of the land you reside on using the website and app nativeland.ca. At the University of Ottawa, we pay respect to the Algonquin people who are the traditional guardians of this land. We acknowledge their long-standing relationship with this territory, which remains unceded. We pay respect to all Indigenous people in this region from all nations across Canada who call Ottawa home. We acknowledge the traditional knowledge keepers, both young and old, and we honor their courageous leaders past, present, and future. We encourage you to recognize and acknowledge the land for which you are joining us this evening. So before getting into the event for today, I'd like to introduce you to the Institute for Science, Society, and Policy for those who aren't familiar with us. We're a cross-faculty institute at the University of Ottawa, exploring the links among science, society, and policy. Our 5-year strategic vision is very ambitious. It is to help Canada transform decision-making to meet the grand challenges of our time. Cybersecurity is certainly one of those. At the Institute, we pursue this strategic vision by strengthening relationships among academia, business, government, Indigenous organizations, and civil society. You'll see some of that work in action live here this evening. 3 key focus areas anchor our strategic plan. The first is fostering public trust in expertise and expert-based decision-making. The second is supporting co-production of government policies by government, business, Indigenous, academic, and civil society leaders. And the third is weaving together technological and social innovations. Again, you'll see these focus areas shine through the session today. So this event today is the fruit of a multi-year partnership between RCIScience and the ISSP to explore contemporary issues at the interface of science, society, and policy. Jointly, we organize one event per year, and this evening, the event focuses on cybersecurity. RCIScience Programs Manager and Science Communicator, Kausar Panchbaya, will be closing the event today, and she'll provide you with more information about RCIScience for those who aren't familiar with the organization. At our partnered events, we invite speakers who can bring science, society, and policy perspectives to an issue. So you'll see that in each of our speakers this evening. As you all know, today's session focuses on cybersecurity, and the event aims to help you develop an understanding of the risks and implications for individuals, for business, and for government. I'm really looking forward to learning today. We have an absolutely stellar panel. It's my great pleasure to introduce your moderator for this evening, Mr. Sumit Bhatia, who is Director of Innovation and Policy for Rogers Cybersecure Catalyst at Toronto Metropolitan University. Sumit brings over 20 years of experience as a business strategist, a digital transformation expert, an academic administrator, and an entrepreneur. Sumit, I don't know how you do all of those things because those are very different qualities in an individual. As Director of Innovation and Policy, Sumit leads the Catalyst Cyber Accelerator, a business accelerator for cybersecurity startups. He also leads the Cybersecure Policy Exchange, a policy and research enterprise dedicated to advancing effective and innovative public policy in cybersecurity and digital privacy. So it's my great pleasure to hand the floor over to Sumit, who will introduce our panelists and moderate the event for today. Sumit, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Monica. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on this Wednesday evening, and a big thank you to ISSP and RCIScience for bringing us together for this very important and timely discussion. My name, again, is Sumit Bhatia. I'm the Director of Innovation and Policy at the Rogers Cybersecure Catalyst. Now, some of you may be familiar with the Catalyst, but I'll provide a very quick overview for those who may not. The Catalyst is a national center for excellence in cybersecurity housed at Toronto Metropolitan University. At the heart of our work is our mission to help the cybersecurity ecosystem in Canada grow and compete at a global level while empowering citizens and organizations alike to be more cybersecure. We focus on 4 key areas of operations strategically crafted to take a holistic approach to ecosystem building. First is our skills and talent development through our accelerated cybersecurity training program, specifically geared to addressing labor market shortages and fostering diversity and inclusion in the Canadian cybersecurity sector. Next, we've got a corporate training and cyber range work that's directed towards capacity building within mid to large organizations in the public and private sectors, so that CXOs, board members, mid to senior level management, policymakers can acquire the knowledge required to embed cybersecurity into their strategic planning frameworks and build a culture of cybersecurity within their respective organizations. As Monica mentioned, we also lead our Cybersecure Policy Exchange that does extensive policy research and tables policy proposals at the cross-section of privacy and security. We've delivered policy briefs and reports on topics ranging from IoT, critical infrastructure, smart city initiatives, biometrics, disinformation campaigns, and nation-state vulnerability disclosure programs. Our 4th area of program is our Catalyst Cyber Accelerator, which was Canada's first cybersecurity-specific business accelerator for scale-ups ranging from quantum computing, biometrics, IoT, access management, and other major areas within the cybersecurity domain. We've also got additional lines of programming focused on capacity building for small, medium businesses, an emerging women leader program that is geared towards expanding representation at the top level of leadership in the cyber domain, and our secure and responsible tech policy course that helps bridge the knowledge gap between technologists and policymakers. Now, I share this detail with you because I do believe it's relevant to our conversation today. First, I'm proud of the incredible work all of our respective organizations are doing to drive the tech policy and innovation ecosystem in Canada. But none of this would be possible without the true collaboration of the public sector, private sector, and academia coming together and aligning themselves. As Monica mentioned, this model works, and organizations like ours and ISSP and RCIScience are a true representation of the success that can happen when there is a thoughtfully structured intersectoral collaboration. We can be the bridge between other groups that, despite good intention and solid investment, sometimes have different priorities that increase the time it takes for alignment. But alignment is what we are working towards, especially as we operate at the crossroads of science, society, and policy. That is why I'm super excited to welcome our esteemed panelists for this amazing discussion today. So I'll kick things off by first introducing John Bruce. John, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Sumit. I just a brief kind of introduction by me. I recently retired, but prior to that, I'd spent 20 years as a government lawyer and senior advisor in this area, cybersecurity and cyber operations, finishing up with a year as general counsel at a local cybersecurity firm to get a sense of what the business side of this process is like. Currently, I'm teaching at a local university, and I have an opportunity to do some research and work with a couple of think tanks in these areas. I thought what I might do in my brief introductory remarks is to provide a sort of thumbnail sketch about the cybersecurity problem and how I've seen it evolve over the last 20 years, how far we've come and how far we have to go, and why I think we might be getting on the right track. When I began working in this area as a government lawyer in the early 2000s, cybersecurity wasn't really a thing. In those days, we called it information technology security, and it wasn't cool. Nobody wanted to talk about information technology security. It was a problem for technologists to worry about, and they focused mainly on correcting inadvertent misconfigurations in network systems before those misconfigurations triggered catastrophic effects. Think Y2K, for those of us who are old enough to remember that. Cyber intrusion activity relied on machine-to-machine deception techniques mainly, and was a dark art practiced largely by nation states. Public concern with cybersecurity began to grow after a number of high-profile cyber intrusions caught everyone's attention. You can choose any number of these. A couple that stick out for me were the Yahoo breach in 2013-2014, where 3 billion user accounts were compromised, and I think more emphatically, the valuation of Yahoo precipitously declined from $125 billion to $5 billion when Verizon finally purchased the company in 2016. There's also the DPR case 2016 WannaCry ransomware worm that lay waste to the UK's NHS as well as other extensive networks. As a result of these incidents and others like them, the public began to see cybersecurity as a public safety issue, capable of wreaking havoc in communities. Because it was a public safety issue, the public waited expectantly for government to manage and eliminate it. But there are a number of reasons why government can't, acting on its own, correct this problem. I think we all know that over 85% of Canadian cyberspace is owned and operated by private entities, and Canadian law restricts the ability of government to unilaterally interfere with private property interests. Computer networks are too complex to realistically expect small businesses and individuals to manage the sophisticated cyber threats we are now seeing on a regular basis today. And cybersecurity is such an integrated ecosystem that the security posture of a nation is only as good as that of its least secure components. What's needed, and what has always been needed, I think, has been a coordinated effort across government, the private sector, and individual users to deal with this issue. In short, cybersecurity is very much a team sport. Until recently, I don't think this has been the case. The efforts of key players, government, commercial sector, individual users have really intersected, and the consistency of practice needed to secure domestic cyberspace hasn't materialized. There have been a number of impediments for this. I'd point out a couple: lack of trusted information sharing protocols, absence of coordinated incident response capability, and the lack of a comprehensive national cyber resilience strategy are among them. But I'm happy to say I think things are changing, and there are two developments I just want to point to very quickly that I think suggest why we're moving in the right direction. The first was the establishment of Canada's Centre for Cybersecurity in 2018 as part of the Communications Security Establishment, which is where I worked for the 20 years I was in government. The Cyber Centre's mission is to lead the Government of Canada's response to cybersecurity events. Under the CSE Act, the Centre has enhanced authorities to share information directly and to directly engage with other levels of government, the private sector, and Canadians. The Centre offers consultation services to the private sector, provides timely threat intelligence, provides technology advisories and regular cyber threat forecasts, not just to other government organizations, but also to the general public and the private sector. And in some cases, when the appropriate conditions are met, the Centre has the authority to directly participate in the defense of private sector networks now. The Centre also runs a number of national public campaigns to raise awareness about the importance of cybersecurity practices for all Canadians. Get Cyber Safe is one of those programs. So what I'm getting at, I think, in the big innovation is that Canada now has a single, well-resourced organization that can disseminate timely and consistent response from a government perspective, providing cybersecurity advice and assistance, and making available to Canadians some of the capabilities that are needed to improve our cybersecurity posture. The second notable development occurred when the Critical Cyber Systems Act was tabled last summer as part of Bill C-26. This legislation created trusted space for government and the private sector to collaborate in a way I think that plays to both their respective needs and strengths. The Act designated 4 federally regulated critical infrastructure systems as vital systems for Canada's national security and public safety: the telecommunications services, interprovincial energy systems, interprovincial transport systems, and federally regulated banking and financial services. The information infrastructures these vital systems relied on are now designated critical cyber systems. The key innovation in all of this is that the regulator responsible for each of these sectors, for example, the Superintendent of Financial Institutions, is directly involved in the development of cybersecurity strategies for each sector. The Act creates 3 obligations that will enhance cybersecurity collaboration in Canada, at least in my opinion. The first is that owner-operators of these systems have to develop a cybersecurity program for their networks that address the key cybersecurity risks they are facing, including cybersecurity implications of third-party products and services. So this is the supply chain problem that until recently hasn't been a focus in cybersecurity planning. The plans must be shared with the regulator of that sector, and the Cyber Center can be consulted in helping to develop them. The second innovation is the sector's regulator and Cyber Center can develop cybersecurity directives for each sector that establish general security requirements for that sector. Once a cybersecurity directive has been developed, operators in that sector must document their efforts to comply with its terms, and the regulator can conduct inspections to assess compliance. And finally, operators of critical cyber systems must report cybersecurity incidents to both the regulator and the Cyber Center on a timely basis. So again, not to hammer at this, but the participation of the regulator in all 3 of these innovations creates the trusted space I think we need to push this problem forward. Most importantly, I think, from a private sector perspective, the operators of these critical cyber systems know they will have a voice in ensuring that the business and operational considerations relevant to their operations in the sector will be properly factored into the development of whatever cybersecurity standards are put in place. The fact that the Cyber Center can be consulted on how to design these programs and directives means that government and the regulator move from being reactive to incidents, which has been the case for most of my career, to being proactive about lessening cybersecurity risks. But ultimately, the design decisions that are going to shape how the cybersecurity measures are created for specific sectors will ultimately be made by the regulator and the members of that sector itself. The other big innovation is that the Cyber Center will now have access to mandatory cyber incident reporting, which will allow them to gain critical cybersecurity intelligence on a timely basis and enable them to provide mitigation advice as soon as practical after an event has occurred. Most importantly, I think one of the big hurdles that we've had in this space over the years I've been involved is a sort of simmering distrust or discomfort over the sharing of information, private sector to government, government to private sector. Rather than continuously saying this is going to be a problem, we are now in a position where if this act is actually called into force, which is a big if, but if it does happen, we're going to have a proof of concept that will allow the government to prove that sharing critical business information with the government doesn't mean you're sharing it with the world. One small drawback, although I think it's important for this to work, is the critical cyber systems only apply to a small number of federally regulated sectors, but this could be a model that could be expanded more broadly within the federal regulated systems and also to provinces for when they're doing provincial regulation. So I'll stop there, but thanks.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that insight. Just before I invite the other panelists as well, I just want to mention to our audience, to set the flow for our conversation today, please jump into the Q&A session as our panelists are presenting. Feel free to share your questions through there as well. We're each going to take 5 minutes to set the context for our conversation, and followed by each one of us having a discussion and then sharing our expertise and insight with you, and we'll keep that discussion interactive. So I just want to point out to the audience that the Q&A is open. On that note, next, I'm going to introduce Mariam Hagigi. Mariam, over to you.
Thank you. I'm delighted to join you all, and many thanks to ISSP and RCIScience for holding this event. My name is Mariam Hagigi, and I'm Director of Data Science at the Bank of Canada. I'd like to also add that the views expressed in this event are my own views, and they do not represent the official views of the Bank of Canada. Just in the past 24 hours, I've booked travel online, I've entered meetings and other appointments online, I've approved requests from my team online, I've filled out medical questionnaire for insurance purposes, I've paid for raw materials, I've signed a contract for renovations online, I did online banking, I paid some bills, I submitted my taxes, all of these online, and probably a few other things that I've already forgotten. And if your lives are anything like mine, you probably have done similar activities like this online. In fact, this very event that we're participating in now is online. Significant parts of our lives are now heavily dependent on our online activities. Jobs are dependent on it. Our economic prosperity is influenced by it. Our businesses, services in both public and private sectors rely on these online exchanges of data and information. And over the past few years, particularly during the pandemic, our reliance on what's often referred to as the digital economy has gotten amplified by multiple orders of magnitudes. At the same time, cyber risks have grown. One key area I'd like to highlight, which Bruce brought it up earlier, John Brewster brought it up earlier as well, is the third-party risk. Third-party providers, this is an area that's been highlighted within the finance industry for a few years now. And businesses may think they're secure because they have their own internal IT systems, but they rely on suppliers. And if those suppliers are facing cyber attacks, then so is your business. And these can have numerous problems, including supply chain problems. For financial industry, the risks have multiple angles. One, just like any other industry, financial industry attackers are interested to do ransomware attacks. The other one is the financial institutions, they store data and make them very appealing targets. Attackers are interested in information that then they can sell and use to extort payments from their victims. Cyber attacks on the financial sectors, including banks, insurance providers, etc., all spiked in 2020, in part because of a rapid shift to remote work due to COVID-19. And there are some reports coming from the Financial Stability Board that say instances of cyber attacks, such as phishing, malware, ransomware, went from about 5,000 per week in February 2020 to over 200,000 per week in April 2021. So just grasp the magnitude of that. And the financial sector has proven to be the most popular target of cyber criminals, accounting for about 25% of all cyber events. The next sector following finance is professional and scientific sectors, by about 24%, and then the public administration comes third. So as financial service firms further digitalize their operations, the threats, of course, continue to grow as well. And a single attack can have devastating consequences. Monetary loss, which we often associate with, is just the tip of the iceberg. Damages can go way beyond that. And they can cost from anywhere from hundreds of thousands to several $1 million. And it doesn't even include impact on their shareholder prices, legal expenses, lost revenues, lost investments. And if cyber attackers get access to the infrastructure, the network routers, and the softwares like what we use for Swift networks, etc., then that can even multiply. In 2021, an attack brought the New Zealand Stock Exchange to a standstill for 3 days. A German company that was a third-party supplier to some German cooperative banks had a cyber attack that then halted the operation of 800 financial institutions in Germany for quite a while and paralyzed their system. So obviously, not surprisingly, the people who founded Canada's central bank in 1935 didn't know a thing about cybersecurity because they didn't have to, and lucky them. At that time, central banks, individual financial institutions were far more concerned with physical security than mitigating the type of cyber-related risk we face today. Their most prized possession used to be gold. Today, it is your data. Of course, nowadays we have several defenses and regulations in place, and we're really fortunate in that in Canada. But of course, it can always be improved. Financial industry oversight in Canada is pretty solid. We have organizations like OSFI who monitor this risk, including cyber risk, banks who look at who participate in that, Bank of Canada, who looks at the overall financial system stability, Payments Canada, that is doing modernization designed to strengthen the underpinning payment system in Canada. And maintaining the trust of Canadians is essential. We need strong protections within each institution, also collaborative partnership between public agencies and the private sector to share information on cyber threats and to strengthen our defenses. In many ways, we're just getting started. The digital economy is expanding rapidly with artificial intelligence, with robotics, biometrics, and emerging technologies. And financial industry is keeping pace with that. But we all want better, faster banking services. That also means that financial industry will adopt new technologies, which also means it will increase the risk. And the risk is quite significant. In fact, banks, credit unions, other players in Canada, they process daily payments of over $175 billion, more than $500 billion in trades of stocks and bonds. These kind of numbers make the financial system a favorite target for cyber criminals. And that really highlights the importance of this topic. So we are fortunate in Canada that we have a strong system in place, but that doesn't mean we can sit back because the landscape is continuously evolving. You may all have heard of OpenAI and ChatGPT, and maybe people used it for fun stuff like generating a love poem on Valentine's Day. Cyber criminals are using it to generate better codes for cyber attacks. So technology always remains a double-edged sword. Another example is quantum computing, essentially a new paradigm for better computing, better capabilities beyond our current computers. We don't have industrial scale quantum computing yet, but it's coming. Attackers are using what's called handle attacks, harvest now, decrypt later type attacks to decrypt later when there is quantum computing available to them. So in Canada, in January, the federal government rolled out this national quantum strategy plan. At the Bank of Canada, we are very proud that we're the first G7 central bank that we have our own quantum strategy. And this is to both leverage the potential of the technology and also to increase our resiliency and preparedness in a forward-looking way. And some of the most famous researchers, I should add, in this domain, that they come from Canada, and they're in Canadian universities, and we are very lucky to collaborate with them, including several researchers from the University of Ottawa. So let me sum it up. Cyber threats aren't going away. Our job will never be done. The threats are constantly evolving. The digital economy is rapidly expanding. It is no longer enough for each institution to maintain its own alarm system. While doing so provides a certain level of protection and comfort, we need to invest in system-wide defenses at the crossroads of science, public policy, and society, and to focus on education, on strategic planning, and that's what we've been doing and will continue to do so. Thanks, Amit.
Thank you, Miriam. Really appreciate that. Folks, next we've got Kristenschenke. Kristen, over to you.
Thank you so much. Again, my name is Kristenschenke, and I am a PhD candidate or all but dissertation at the Balsillie School of International Affairs, which is located in Waterloo. And my research focuses on the governance side of cybersecurity, as well as the management of emerging technologies in Canada. I just want to start off by thanking the organizers for the invitation to speak to you all today at this panel event. And I'm very pleased to be joined by such a distinguished panel of experts, and I'm very much looking forward to our conversations this evening. I'd like to frame my contributions today about cybersecurity at the crossroads of science, society, and policy around a key word that I find fitting for this discussion. And that word is enmeshed. Enmeshed or entangled is a way that we can think about science, technology, and policy, as well as the issue areas that come up in our understanding of their interconnections. So cybersecurity is not only networks or technologies or a human government or a state security issue. It's an entanglement of all of these areas, as well as things, people, policies, and ideas. And I'll give an example here. So the Canadian National Strategy for Critical Infrastructure lists 10 sectors as critical infrastructure, and these include energy, utilities, finance, food, transportation, etc. Each of the 10 sectors is a combination of services, people, private sector businesses as operators, and connected technologies that go between sectors. So let's think about transportation for a moment. We're seeing an increase in investment in electric vehicles, and they're becoming more accessible to some consumers. The vehicles themselves are an interconnected technology that includes the physical structure of the car, software, chips, sensors, and batteries. It also expands out into other physical locations, like in the home through chargers, Wi-Fi routers, in data, in your pocket through phone apps, and in public and private charging stations linked to the electric grid and energy utilities. We can see the expanded threat surface come into focus from this example, with plenty of entry points and vulnerabilities for malicious cyber actors. In policies to address cybersecurity issues, we also must consider the intentions of malicious cyber actors, the actors themselves, the types of activities they may engage in, their methods, targets, among other considerations. But we shouldn't also forget that there are also other societal impacts and considerations, like technology's accessibility, access, equity, as well as the impact on the environment, such as, for example, physical roads, city layout, rural connectivity, etc. We need to think about cybersecurity considerations, for example, critical infrastructure broadly, as a mesh, but we also need to think about the specific considerations that comprise each sector, both individually and as an interconnected whole. This means understanding people in society as creators, users, and even non-users. So when we think about governing the issues related to cybersecurity through policy, then we need to consider this enmeshment of people, understand how interconnected technologies work, how humans interact with it or not, and how cybersecurity issues are seen as threats and how they are then dealt with in policy. So I think the bottom line here is that we shouldn't shy away from complexity in society, in science, and in technology. Standing at the crossroads, we need cooperation between diverse actors, an understanding of the realities of cyber threats, sector-specific guidance, and an appreciation of our lived experiences of cybersecurity. Thank you, and I'll leave it there, and I'll pass it back to our moderator.
Thank you, Kristen. Really appreciate that. I'm going to try and bring together the discussion, three very interesting and unique perspectives, but there's a lot of alignment there. And when I hear some of these perspectives, one of the things that stands out for me is that in a world of digital transformation, where technological change is driving all mechanics of our society and systems, privacy and security will be the layers of trust that allow everyone to embrace this change. Now, as you've heard from our fellow panelists, the rapid advancement of technology and an unprecedented growth in the adoption of digital transformation initiatives, especially through the course of this pandemic, has led to an exponential rise in the security and privacy risks and vulnerabilities faced by all Canadians, businesses, and citizens alike. These risks are growing in light of the current geopolitical situations, as well as the growing vulnerabilities of our cities, municipalities, critical infrastructure units, small, medium businesses, our innovation economy and startups, and others, while exposing cracks in some of our legacy systems. Now, organizations of all sizes are trying to find ways to stay efficient, relevant, and operational. But this will not happen simply by finding new ways to do old things or adopt old ways to do new things, but by changing the way we view our relationship to technology as individuals, organizations, a nation, and as a collective society. And at the same time, we're being observed by the other side, the hackers, the attackers that are constantly looking for new ways to make a dollar or disrupt our way of life and alter the trust framework that holds our societies and people together. From cyber criminals to insider threats to nation states, The volume and sophistication of actors attempting to exploit vulnerabilities to gain or disrupt access to our digital systems is growing. Our reliance on these systems is only accelerating as more smart devices, social media platforms, biometric technologies, and other disruptive technologies like our panelists shared, like AI, ChatGPT, continue to emerge. Now, as we invest and grow our digital lives and our digital economy, digital crime grows with it. At the current rate of growth, damage from cyber attacks will amount to somewhere around $10.5 trillion annually by 2025, a 300% increase from 2015 levels that was recently reported in some research from McKinsey. In 2021-22, the cost of cybercrime to Canadians was in excess of $6 billion between ransoms and loss of business and productivity. More than half of the ransomware attacks were on critical infrastructure. Nearly half of Canadian small, medium businesses suffered from some form of a cyber attack. And perhaps one of the most important issues that I know will come up today is the shortage of cyber talent, which ties in the continued growth we want to see in this ecosystem. Now, these challenges impact the most intimate details of our personal, financial, and work lives. They also influence our most complex systems, infrastructure, healthcare, education, finance, and how governments, citizens, and businesses engage with each other. And cybersecurity and digital privacy are not just technical matters, as you've heard as well resonate today, that only experts should care about. They must be matters of vital importance to all Canadians. And that is why, while I've shared some key challenges, and you've heard that from our panelists as well, we also have an amazing slew of opportunities that lie before us as a nation and as individuals, so we can invest in this sector with care and caution, but also enthusiasm. Canada has the talent, the academic infrastructure, and the intellectual capacity to be a pipeline for cyber talent for the world. We have a massive capacity for research in new and emerging technologies, including deep tech. We have an innovation engine at work that is driving the creation and commercialization of new ideas and intellectual property. And not to mention, there's a $2 trillion market opportunity for cybersecurity technology and service providers. But we have to work together and not in silos. We have to go beyond traditional ways of education and think about new ways for capacity building and knowledge mobilization. And we have to align ourselves to key priorities, such as the ones we talked about, expanding the technological awareness and capacity of our citizens, bridging the talent gap and expanding the cyber workforce pipeline, boosting cyber research and commercialization, securing our critical infrastructure, our supply chains, and boosting our national security and resilience, and of course, continuing to shape our public policy to reflect this new and emerging technology domain. Now that brings us to this fantastic conversation that I'm going to dig in, and I know there's some questions already pouring in now. So let me jump into perhaps the first question that I've got here in the Q&A. Please continue to share them. The first question I have here is, in observing incidents reported on news networks, it is apparent that cyber warfare has begun by attacking critical infrastructure, especially energy networks, by both state-sponsored activity and non-state. We have not even begun to address how we are going to protect critical infrastructure from attacks. I'm going to ask any one of our panelists to maybe kick things off by taking a stab at that first question. John, maybe I'll point to you because I know you had spoken about this, so maybe you want to take it first.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question, and it's a very poignant point. For my money and the experience I've had over the period I've been working in this area, I think we need to differentiate two problem sets, which isn't to diminish either one of them or ignore any of them, but this concept of cyber warfare in its traditional sense is a contest of wills between states. And that, as it's always been, it can be a great power struggle, or it can be a unipolar world where one state exercises dominance over others, as we experienced in the 90s and the early 2000s in the United States. The point is that's always going to be part of the noise and the infrastructure of the international community. When we look at cybersecurity, I think we're looking at something that is totally and utterly related to that, but it's slightly different. For me, the emphasis needs to be first from a cybersecurity perspective on resiliency. And I love Kristen's concept of enmeshment. I don't think that's a word, but being enmeshed. This is this concept of kind of creating trusted spaces for collaboration on all layers with all or as many participants as possible domestically. So making Canada more cyber resilient than it is now, knowing that incidents are going to happen and there are going to be problems, we're going to have to learn to cope with them. At the same time, looking forward into how we manage Canada manages its relationship with other states in cyberspace, I think that's a slightly different issue. It's certainly related, but I think different considerations are at play there. That is essentially about how do we create, although I don't like the word and the concept, but this concept of how do we deter states from taking advantage of environmental conditions that they feel are beneficial to them, whether that's housing sophisticated cyber criminal groups and benefiting from the money that's generated through that process, or whether it's actually engaged in cyber operations and by state officials in their own right. Again, as I said, I think that problem related to cybersecurity can't be our focus. Both of these things have to be built up separately, I think, and with different objectives, I guess what I'm trying to say.
Thanks, John. I appreciate that. And you raised the concept of enmeshment. So, Kristen, maybe I'll jump back to you because you talked about it. I just want to recognize last year ended and this year has kicked off with a series of attacks on organizations, many that impact the lives of many Canadians. Sick Kids Hospital, LCBO, Indigo just recently are only a few, and then many grocery stores, social media outlets, messaging and communication systems. Can you maybe tell us if this is the new normal? And given the widespread impact of these attacks, are we as an industry and as a nation giving cybersecurity the importance it deserves, given how enmeshed we are as a society with this?
Thank you for that question. Yeah, I think when we're talking about this new normal that is full of daily cyber attacks, I think we need to back it up a little bit and think that some of these things are not new. So, for example, the interconnectedness of information, technologies, devices on the internet brings about new vulnerabilities, new threat vectors. And so that's something that's not necessarily new. But what is new is the sheer amount of services, of people engaging in activities online, information that is stored and transmitted, just the sheer amount that has come about, we can argue, as a result of the pandemic, but this is something that has been happening before the pandemic. Perhaps it's just been accelerated during this time. So this provides an environment or an ecosystem of people, technologies, services, information, etc., that can be exploited by malicious cyber actors. And so that isn't necessarily new, but the sheer amount, I think, is new. Another thing that I think is part of this new normal is our awareness of these cyber attacks, and more so the public awareness of these cyber attacks, big ones, small ones that perhaps impact us directly, for example, at a hospital or at our favorite bookstore, for example. And I think when it comes to addressing these cyber attacks and how they impact us, I think we need to kind of take a few steps back and think. So recognizing that these threats exist and raising awareness about these different threats is good and is important. But one thing we really need to do is really expand that cybersecurity literacy and really develop that cybersecurity talent that Canada has to offer. But it's not just getting more people involved in the field. It's attracting people to the field and keeping them in the field. So that kind of attract and retain sort of piece. And I think really that comes from a cybersecurity literacy, at a very early age, and progressing through our lifespans and understanding that there are, this need for resiliency. There's also this need for adaptability, and that's something that we as humans need to do, as well as businesses, large and small businesses, government, private sector operators of critical infrastructure systems, etc. So I think this is our new reality, but we need to understand that this is something we need to deal with beyond just saying it happens. What can we do about it?
Thanks, Kristen. Something you mentioned there around the human element, I think leads me to my next question for Mariam. Mariam, you talked a little bit about just the fintech sector. You talked about ransomware attacks and, how that is a key attack strategy. Do organizations, both in the public and private sector, one, understand the full spectrum of risk associated with ransomware, especially when we, think about, it being seen primarily as a technology issue and not necessarily a human issue or an organizational issue at large when we think about quantifying risk associated with it. Can you maybe share your thoughts around that?
Sure, good question, Sumit. So here are a few things. Sometimes it's a very complex situation because of the interconnectedness that was mentioned earlier. It makes it very hard to quantify the risk of a systemic cyber event. And those are the ones that we discover, because there might be ones that we don't even discover. Sometimes in some cases, companies are approaching this, organizations are approaching this from the wrong lens. I mean, yes, it's technology is obviously involved, but it's a question of people, education, strategy. It's the whole picture that we need to think about. And when we talk about whole picture, and of course, working at the central bank, we'll look at things at the macro level. And I work with economists day to day, and I try to learn from them and a language they use. So there is this concept that's sometimes used, this phrase called the tragedy of the commons. So let me explain. So think of a system where everyone has to share a finite resource. Often individuals would think of their own needs first, and then they pay little attention to the common good. The problem is that if everyone thinks of only of their own interest, that shared resource will get used up and everybody is worse off. So that is the tragedy of the common good. Now, the point here is that there are situations where governments need to step in to protect the common good. So think when the global financial crisis happened, and regulations had to be put in place to protect society for that. In some ways, I think with the cybersecurity question that we have on our hand, is this system-wide perspective that is sometimes missing, where we are paying little attention to risk to the entire system and to the society in general, and really need to bring that lens of the societal risk in Canada, but also internationally with our allies, because it's a, the boundaries of internet don't respect the cyber criminals, don't go based on this jurisdiction versus another. So it makes it a really complex, interconnected matter that's not just a question for technology, it's a question for policymakers. It's a question for legal professionals. It's of course a question for technologies, but it's also a question for, I would go as far as to say, for ethicists who think about what is right in our society. Where are we at and where do we want to be? And how far do we want to go in terms of enforcement and regulation, looking at this from a societal perspective?
Thank you, Mariam. That's really interesting. I'm going to actually jump into another really interesting question that's coming to our audience here. Are academic institutions in Canada up to the challenge research and education in protecting us from this type of environment, this type of cyber attack ecosystem that we're looking at and the warfare that's taking place? And as I know many of us are affiliated with academic institutions and the research arena, I'd love to hear any one of your thoughts in taking that on. Are we up to this challenge? Kristen, maybe if you want to jump in there, just I know some of the work you're doing aligns with this.
Thank you for that question. I would say Canada has a lot of talent, both from the STEM side, the technical side, as well as from the social side of addressing these particular problems when we talk about cybersecurity related issues. And I think a lot of our academic institutions, as well as the collaborative research that they're doing through research centers or research projects, both between universities and in collaboration with the private sector, is unbelievably important. I think it's very important when we talk about these different collaborations, especially between academic institutions and industry, that we also need to bring in, other actors who are involved in cybersecurity. So, whether that's working directly with industry on a particular problem set, bringing in government, various departments to help understand the full breadth of the situation, I think that's important. But the other point that I want to really stress is that, again, when we're looking at cybersecurity issues, it's not something that should just stay in a lab or should just stay in one discipline. We need to understand that it crosses disciplines, and we need to really understand that we don't want to silo cybersecurity. So when we are thinking about academic collaborations and academic institutions working on these problems, it's going across disciplines and really leveraging that expertise that we have in the social sciences, in the humanities, and pairing that with our expertise in the STEM disciplines.
Thank you, Kristen. I really appreciate that response. I think, as you pointed out, just the diversity of representation, of thought, of different groups coming together, we really do need to take a much broader view of how we're addressing some of these challenges. So really appreciate that response. Thank you. John, maybe I'll pose this next question to you that's coming through our chat board here. There are definitely a wide variety of measures in place to account for and mitigate exposure to cyber attacks across different parts of our ecosystem. Are there any initiatives in place to deter cybercrime with a preventative approach? Are we thinking about that from a policy perspective, or are we consistently in reactive mode when it comes to some of these things?
That's again another great question. I think it depends on how we approach the problem, and what I mean by that is both operationally and conceptually. Cybercrime is going to continue to be a problem, and our focus, I believe, and I think most of the technologists I've worked with in my career would argue that the best effort one can make is to, first of all, create an environment where resiliency is the primary objective. You're not going to stop all ransomware attacks necessarily. You may stop some if you have appropriate host-based and network-based censoring, but you're not going to be able to stop some of them. What are you doing about your data? Are you backing up your data so that you can recover quickly? You're not looking at a crippling event in your operations that's going to bring you to your knees, which is what the ransomware activists are looking for, so that you're paying the ransom is much more attractive option than trying to kind of rebuild and move the system through. So I think resiliency is a big thing. And then secondly, I think, again, back to my concept about this sort of other track, which is how are nations going to cope with this? We're going to have to start thinking about compromises about how we view cyberspace. I'm going to do this super quick, and I apologize if people feel this is a bit off the mark, but we have to keep thinking that and keep remembering that Western liberal democracies largely built most of the internet that we enjoy today. And that is premised on a number of key principles, one of which is free enterprise, freedom of expression, freedom of association, all of which I'm totally in favor of, of course. But there are nations that have large capabilities that feel that is a threat to their national security and national identity. Russia's a primary example. They're spending a lot of time in international fora looking for ways to embed this concept of cyber sovereignty and the ability for states to be able to manage their internets. So the internet becomes not one global function, but rather a series of interconnected internets. Now, again, I'm not suggesting one of those is better than the other. I know which one I favor, but that's not really relevant here. My point is, if we're going to deal with cyber crime, We're going to have to get on board with other nations that view our efforts to have the ability to criminally indict and potentially investigate criminal activity in other states. We're going to have to look at how they view those processes and procedures in their own constructs around state sovereignty and appropriate state behavior. Again, as I said, I'm not trying to suggest we need to make concessions, but I think it's naive on our part to simply suggest that this is a problem, it's bothering me, it's probably bothering you as well. Why don't we use the remedies and the processes that we, again, Western liberal democracies, have felt are the most appropriate way to kind of deal with that. So this is why I always try and not differentiate, but always create kind of a very thin barrier between the international aspects of all of this and the domestic aspects of it. I think there's an awful lot of work to do on the domestic side, awful lot of work to do on the international side. Both of them things can happen concurrently, but they're not necessarily the same problem, and they're not necessarily going to be approached in the same way with the same level of diligence and unilateral effort, I guess is what I'm trying to get at.
John, that's a great point. I mean, I think the whole idea of stepping outside our Western liberal democratic bubble, so to speak, that we often operate from, we do need to think about other nations, other societies, how they're operating, especially in this world of global trade, because global trade is still continuing as we go through this. So I'm going to try, in the interest of time, combine a couple of questions together for our panelists, and maybe this might be the last one given the time. So we know that IoT devices are a big risk. We also know a lot of the manufacturing happening around IoT is coming from other countries that we rely on for manufacturing capacity. We know that there's cross-border data flows that are happening, and there are Canadian businesses that rely on that data to drive their operations. As we are thinking about public policy, can you, maybe any of our panelists, share thoughts on what are some of the opportunities we see for Canada as it shapes its policies around security and privacy and this global trade environment, with some of the new proposed frameworks that we're looking at, like the Bill C-26 that, John, you talked about, and some of the other ones we're seeing come in the system. How do we make sure that we aren't always reactive and we are thinking of this as an opportunity in our public policy domain? I'll leave that open to anybody who wants to jump in.
Well, maybe I'll add a few thoughts that came to my mind, Sumit. So one is around education. And we talked about that earlier. Preparing workforce, but also preparing society. Even down to individual levels. I mean, how are you using your devices at home? How are you conducting work? Like all of those things, many of the incidents actually happen via, unintentional mishaps that just people weren't aware of. So there is something that each one of us can do to educate ourselves and learn more. Doesn't need to be complicated, but of course on the more complex side we can rely on expertise. Then there is this concept of being proactive, and this connects with the entire system of startups and entrepreneurs in Canada and in general Western societies who have interests aligned with the overall interests of liberal democracies, as John alluded to earlier. That can we invest as a society in bringing those ideas to fruition, to products that are tested and certified and produced within supply chains that we can certify and use those. So you, as a consumer, you have a choice, and also it's not only it's a question of cybersecurity, but it's a question of societal prosperity as to where do you want to invest your money and where do you want to purchase products. So those are some things that come to my mind, that I think there is actually an opportunity here to have certified products that are certified by standards in Canada and US, and some of that already exists. But we need to really advertise that and get that out and promote. And there are some, of course, some government programs who do that promote that. So we really need to emphasize those.
Those are great points. I just want really quick, Sumit, sorry to jump in, but I think there's also this issue of social responsibility, and what I'm, as Marianne's been pointing out, I mean, it crosses the whole board, but there's also this concept that private sector and governments have potentially greater social responsibility in this area than anyone else. And I'm just thinking about the Biden's executive order in 2001, promoting cybersecurity in terms of through contracting terms, which I won't get into now. But one of the initiatives is they're going to create an interagency and private sector cyber safety review board. It's going to be like the National Transportation Safety Board, which has been used by railways and aviation companies for years. When events happen, this group or groups will sit down, they'll examine them, and they'll draw out lessons learned, which then can be distributed widely to everyone else in the industry. And I think this is where we start to kind of generate muscle memory around these things. Many of the breaches that we understand and know happen can be caused, like the Equifax breach, was caused by an HVAC company that had personal home AV system set up to run its company's cybersecurity services. That kind of thing gets drawn out, I think, in these kind of social responsibility processes that if we're able to develop more effectively. Sorry, I didn't mean to jump in there.
No, appreciate that. Thank you, John. Thank you, Mariam, for that. This is one of those topics we can continue on for a long time, but I think it's safe to say that we're grateful for the unique perspectives that esteemed guests like yourself bring to this conversation. And together, I think we can create and implement balanced policy in security and digital privacy that will drive innovation while also protecting Canadian society and maintaining some of these great liberties that we have. So I just want to take a moment to say thank you to all of you, and thank you again to our hosts today for organizing this. I hope all of your audience got a lot of great insight, and I'm going to pass this on to Kausar now, who will help close this up.
Thank you, Sumit, and hello, everyone. As Sumit mentioned, my name is Kausar, and I'm the Programs Manager at ISSP-RCIScience. The Royal Canadian Institute formed in 1849 as a society of engineers and entrepreneurs interested in the exchange of ideas. We have hosted public events for over a century with the goal of connecting Canadians with science and scientists. Our events cover diverse topics in science, engineering, medicine, and public policy, to name a few. ISSP-RCIScience is also a registered charity funded through contributions and sponsorships from universities, corporations, and individuals who believe in our vision. Before we end the event tonight, I wanted to thank all of our speakers for taking the time to share their expertise with us and for such an enlightening discussion. As Sumit mentioned, we've been receiving so many great questions, and we could honestly talk about this topic forever. But unfortunately, we do have to wrap up the event, and I wanted to thank our audience for tuning in and asking such great questions. We hope you enjoyed tonight's panel discussion on cybersecurity. For anyone who tuned in late or simply wants to rewatch the discussion, a recording is available to watch on YouTube. We'd love to know what you thought of tonight's event and what you'd like to see from us in the future. Check out our feedback form to share your thoughts with us. You can find the link in the chat box or in your email inbox shortly after the event. As for upcoming events, join ISSP next Thursday, February 23rd, for their monthly luncheon speaker series, Food for Thought. Next week's event will be on research and training advances in solar power plants and photonic power conversion. To learn more about our organizations and upcoming events, visit our websites. You can also subscribe to our newsletters and be amongst the first to receive details about all of our upcoming events right to your inbox. But again, that is all for today. So thank you for joining us this evening, and we hope to welcome you to another event in the near future. Bye for now.